You're lying there, eyes open, staring at nothing. It's the middle of the night, completely dark, and your brain has decided that right now, right this second, is the perfect time to replay every mildly embarrassing thing you've ever done. You roll over, you flip the pillow, you check your phone, which you know is a mistake, but you do it anyway, because apparently you hate yourself. The screen says 3:17 a.m. You groan. You've been trying to sleep for 2 hours. Now here's the thing, you're not special. Not in this context anyway. Insomnia, restlessness, lying awake in the dark, staring at absolutely nothing while your brain refuses to cooperate. This isn't a modern problem. This isn't something screens invented. This isn't something that started when humans decided to drink coffee at 4 p.m. This has been happening for as long as humans have existed, maybe longer. Ancient humans, the ones sleeping on dirt floors in caves, the ones huddled around dying fires on open savannas, surrounded by things that could eat them, they couldn't sleep sometimes either. Their brains did the same thing yours does. Just switched on in the middle of the night and refused to switch off. But here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. What they did about it was radically, almost unrecognizably different from what we do. And the science behind it suggests that they might have actually been doing it right while we, with all our sleep apps and weighted blankets and melatonin gummies, might be doing it completely wrong. Let's get into it. Start something that's going to mess with everything you think you know about sleep. You've been told your entire life that 8 hours of unbroken sleep is the goal. 8 straight hours, one block. Go to bed, close your eyes, wake up 8 hours later feeling refreshed. That's the template. That's what every doctor, every wellness influencer, every mattress commercial has drilled into your head since childhood. It's wrong. Or at least it's incomplete. In 2001, a historian named Roger Eckhurch at Virginia Tech published research that fundamentally changed how we understand pre-industrial sleep. He spent 16 years going through historical documents, diaries, medical texts, court records, literature, anything that described how people actually slept before electric lighting existed. And what he found was remarkable. Before the Industrial Revolution, humans did not sleep in one block. They slept in two distinct periods of sleep, separated by a gap of 1 to 2 hours of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. Eckhurch called it segmented sleep or biphasic sleep. The first period was called first sleep, the second was called second sleep, and the gap between them, that window of midnight wakefulness, was not insomnia. It was not a disorder. It was not a problem. It was completely, entirely, boringly normal. Think about that for a second. For most of human history, waking up at 2 a.m. and lying there for an hour was not a medical condition. It was just Tuesday. It was what sleep looked like. It was the default setting. And Eckhurch didn't find a few references to this. He found hundreds, across multiple centuries, across multiple cultures, across multiple languages. The pattern was so consistent and so widespread that it was clearly not a regional habit or a cultural quirk. It was biological. It was how human sleep naturally organized itself when artificial lighting wasn't available to override the pattern. So what did people do during that midnight gap? What did ancient humans do when they were lying there, awake, in the dark, between first and second sleep? Honestly, kind of everything. Let's start with the most obvious one. They talked. In a world without phones, without television, without any source of entertainment that didn't require another human being, nighttime wakefulness was social. People who slept in groups, which was virtually everyone for most of human history, would wake during the gap and simply talk to each other. Quiet conversation in the dark. No agenda, no purpose. Just the low murmur of voices in a space between sleep cycles. Anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups have documented this extensively. Among the San people of southern Africa and the Hadza of Tanzania, researchers have observed that nighttime wakefulness often involves soft conversation, storytelling, and gentle social bonding that doesn't happen during the busy daylight hours. This wasn't wasted time. This was some of the most intimate, unguarded communication humans could have. No tasks to complete, no food to gather, no predators to watch for, usually. Just voices in the dark, processing the day, sharing thoughts, reinforcing social bonds that were literally a matter of survival. There's a theory, and it's a credible one, that some of humanity's earliest storytelling traditions emerged from exactly this context. Stories told in the gap. Myths passed from one generation to the next in that strange liminal window between first and second sleep. When the fire had burned low and the world was quiet, and the only thing left to do was talk. Now here's something most people don't expect. Ancient humans who couldn't sleep or who were awake during the midnight gap didn't just lie there passively. They got up, they moved around, they did things. This drives modern sleep experts absolutely crazy because the number one piece of advice for insomnia today is stay in bed. Don't stimulate yourself, don't get up, just lie there, and eventually you'll fall back asleep. Ancient humans did the exact opposite, and it apparently worked fine for about 300,000 years. Historical and anthropological records show that people during the midnight gap would tend fires, adding fuel and adjusting the burn to keep it going until morning. They would check on children. They would step outside to relieve themselves. They would eat small snacks. They would perform simple, repetitive tasks, mending tools, braiding cords, sorting materials for the next day. None of this was done with urgency. None of it was stressful. It was calm, purposeful, low-intensity activity that filled the gap naturally and without anxiety. And that last part, the without anxiety part, is actually the most important difference between ancient nighttime wakefulness and modern insomnia. Because here's what modern insomnia actually is. It's not wakefulness. Wakefulness is just being awake. Insomnia is wakefulness plus dread. It's lying there at 3 a.m. thinking something is wrong with me. Why can't I sleep? I have to be up in 4 hours. I'm going to be exhausted tomorrow. This is going to ruin my day. My health is deteriorating. What if this never gets better? That psychological spiral, that layer of anxiety about not sleeping, is arguably more damaging than the wakefulness itself. And it's a uniquely modern invention. Ancient humans didn't have it because they didn't have the expectation of 8 unbroken hours. There was no standard to fall short of. Waking up in the middle of the night wasn't failure. It was just what happened. The anxiety is the disease. The wakefulness is just the symptom we've misdiagnosed. Let's talk about another thing ancient humans did during wakeful nights that sounds almost absurdly simple, but has deep biological roots. They looked at the sky. Before light pollution, before cities, before even permanent settlements, the night sky was incomprehensibly vivid. Not the handful of stars you can maybe see from your backyard. Thousands. Tens of thousands. The full band of the Milky Way stretching across the entire visible dome. Planets visibly moving against the background stars over the course of weeks. The moon cycling through its phases with obvious trackable regularity. Ancient humans who couldn't sleep had access to the most spectacular visual display in the natural world, and they watched it. Carefully, systematically, over generations. Some of the earliest evidence of astronomical observation dates back tens of thousands of years. Bone artifacts from the Upper Paleolithic, roughly 30,000 years ago, show carved marks that researchers believe represent lunar phase tracking. These people were using sleepless nights to build calendars. That's not nothing. That's the foundation of timekeeping, agriculture, navigation, and eventually mathematics. Some of humanity's most important intellectual achievements may have started because someone was lying awake at 2 a.m., looked up, and started counting. Now let's address something slightly uncomfortable. Sex, obviously. The midnight gap between first and second sleep was, across virtually all historical references, one of the primary times for sexual activity. Kirch's research found that medical texts from the medieval period actually recommended the gap between first and second sleep as the ideal time for conception. Not because of any mystical belief, but because people were relaxed, unhurried, and not exhausted from a full day of labor. In a world without private bedrooms, without separate living spaces, where families and sometimes multiple families slept in shared quarters, the quiet darkness of the midnight gap provided a window of relative privacy that daytime simply didn't offer. This is practical reproductive biology shaped by the architecture of sleep. Here's something else that's genuinely fascinating. Ancient humans who couldn't sleep almost certainly used the time for a kind of mental processing that we'd now recognize as something close to meditation or prayer. During the gap between first and second sleep, the brain exists in a unique neurochemical state. Levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with relaxation and dreamlike thinking, are elevated during this period. The brain is not fully in waking mode and not fully in sleep mode. It's somewhere in between, a kind of twilight consciousness that facilitates reflective, associative, almost hallucinatory thinking. Researchers have suggested that this state may have been particularly important for creativity and problem solving. The kind of thinking that happens when you're not quite awake and not quite asleep, where ideas connect in unusual ways and solutions to problems seem to appear from nowhere. That's the midnight gap. That's the neurochemistry of 2 a.m. wakefulness in a brain that isn't panicking about tomorrow's alarm. Some historians have speculated that visions, religious experiences, and moments of creative breakthrough reported throughout human history may have occurred disproportionately during this window. Not because of divine intervention, but because the brain was in a state specifically conducive to that kind of loose boundary-dissolving thought. We may have actually lost access to an entire category of human cognition by eliminating the midnight gap from our sleep architecture. That's a wild thought, but it's not an unreasonable one. So let's bring this together. What did ancient humans do when they couldn't sleep? They talked quietly in the dark with people they loved. They tended fires. They watched the stars and built the first calendars. They held their children. They thought long, slow, unhurried thoughts in a brain state we've essentially engineered out of existence. They had sex. They told stories. They processed grief and fear and wonder without any pressure to be doing something more productive. And the single most important thing they didn't worry about it. They didn't treat it as a problem. They didn't pathologize it. They didn't Google their symptoms. They just lived through the night, calmly, and fell back asleep when their body was ready. Here's the part that should genuinely bother you. We destroyed this. Not on purpose. Not maliciously. But we destroyed it. The invention of artificial lighting in the 19th century collapsed the midnight gap almost overnight. When you can keep the lights on until 11 p.m., the natural segmented sleep pattern compresses into one block. The gap disappears. First sleep and second sleep merge into one continuous. Your body might be trying to do something ancient, something it was designed to do, something that worked perfectly well for 250,000 years. And instead of listening to it, you're lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, convinced something is wrong with you. Maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe you're just between sleeps. Maybe your ancestors would have gotten up, added a log to the fire, looked at the stars for a while, and gone back to bed without a second thought. Maybe the problem isn't that you can't sleep. Maybe the problem is that you forgot how to be awake.